Hello, everyone. It's Scott, and welcome to day 3 of Outlaws of Thunder Junction spoiler season. So, we got a bunch of interesting cards to talk about today. But before we do that, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Outlaws of Thunder Junction spoiler season. And later on next week, after the full set is out, we'll be doing some preview videos of top 10 list for rares, mythics, and commons, and also our uncommons. So let's dive into Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So first we have Railway Brawler for 3 and 2 green mana. You get a Rhino Warrior with Reach and Trample. That's a 5/5. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is its power. So very interesting ability there, where any creature coming into play is going to be able to, in essence, get additional +1/+1 counters equal to its power. So I can see this in a wide variety of decks. Now the question is, where does it fit best? But the fact that you're getting that many +1/+1 counters every single time you cast a creature, that's a pretty powerful ability in standard. And you can also plot it, so that means you can kind of hide it away until you need it and then use it to go ahead and take advantage of that ability. So I really like this card. The question is, where is it going to fit? Are we going to have a Jund deck that maybe it wants to go, and maybe in a Gruul deck that it would work well in? But I think there's definitely a place for it in standard, and I'm interested to see where deck builders are going to go with it. Next, we've got Smuggler's Surprise for a green mana and plus. It's an instant with Spree, and if you pay 2 additional mana, you get to mill 4 cards, and you may put up to 2 creature and or land cards from among them, those that were milled, into your hand. For 4 and a green mana, you may put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. And for +1, creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. So I really like the flexibility within these spree cards that we're seeing. And I think they're going to see, just generally, certainly all the rare ones that we've seen so far, I think they're all going to be very playable in standard. The question is just finding kind of the right number and where they fit. And I think this is another good example of a card that deck builders are going to want to have in their deck. Next, we've got Kellen Joins Up for a green, a white, and a blue mana. You get a legendary enchantment. And when Kellen Joins Up enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted. And whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So we've seen cards similar to this. There's actually one that basically does exactly the same thing from Streets of New Capenna that saw almost no play. So I worry that despite the enter the battlefield trigger of plotting a card, I just don't think it's good enough if we're already in a wide standard and we're not seeing a card that's similar to this seeing play. Next, we've got Roxanne Starfall Savant for 3, a red and a green mana. You get legendary creature, that's a cat druid, and is a 4/3. And whenever Roxanne Starfall Savant enters the battlefield or attacks, create a tap colorless artifact token named Meteorite with, when Meteorite enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. So I like that. Hey, you immediately comes into play and you get a benefit immediately from it by doing 2 damage to something. And then after that, you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. And whenever you tap an artifact token for mana, add 1 mana of any type that artifact token produces. So basically, you get to produce 2 mana from any artifact that you are using to create mana. And I really like the ability here on Roxanne. Now, again, it's 5 mana, so does it have a home in standard? Possibly, but we'll have to kind of see if a kind of mid-rangey Gruul deck or maybe Jund or some other kind of deck is out there that would want this card in it. Next, we've got Tai Waken Perfect Shot for a red and a white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human mercenary and is a 2/3. And whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to a creature equal to that creature's toughness, draw a card. So very nice ability there. You hit something with a play with fire or a lightning strike and you kill it, then you go ahead and get to draw a card as a reward for that. So I like that ability in a, Boros kind of spell slinger type deck where we'd be doing that. And you can also pay X and tap Tiny Walking. And if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus X instead. So I like that ability to just add additional damage, and whether it's a permanent or to an opponent. So if I'm going to face with a play with fire, and I've got 4 extra mana, and I may also play, I can pump that 4 extra mana in there and deal 4 extra damage. So I think if there is a Boros deck that is going to be playing more of a burn strategy, this is a card I think kind of fits into that style of deck. Next, we've got Archangel of Tithes for 1 and 3 white mana. You get an angel with flying, and it's a 3/5. As long as Archangel of Tithes is untapped, creatures cannot attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. As long as Archangel of Tithes is attacking, creatures cannot block unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. So very much we've had prison decks in the past, but right now, based on a couple of extra cards that we're seeing from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, I think there's probably a decent prison style deck out there. It might be Boros, it might be some other options, but there's so many cards that in essence have hate in them, that they're making you pay extra mana or do damage to you because you're simply playing the game. And I think there's a deck out there that's going to want this. It's just going to be figuring out how to build it right. And if that's the case, it's going to be a pretty powerful deck in Standard. Next, we've got Geralf the Flesh Right for 2 and a blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human warlock and is a 2/3. And whenever you cast a spell during your turn other than your first spell that turn, create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token. Whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each other zombie that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So very nice abilities on it. Hey, you cast your second spell and your third spell on a given turn, you get to create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token every time you do that. And then if you think about it, also we've got his sister Gisa, who gives all of your skeletons and your zombies +1/+1. And I think between the two of them and all of the cards we got from Innistrad, that there's probably a pretty decent deck out there that we can build around, whether it's simply a zombie deck or a skeleton and zombie. Now, is it going to be a tier 1 deck? Probably not, but it's going to be an interesting deck. And people who like kind of playing tribal themes, I think it'll be an interesting deck for them to play. Next, we've got Hellspur Posse Boss for 2 and 2 red mana. You get Lizard Rogue, that's a 2/4. And other outlaws you control have haste. And outlaws are assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks are all outlaws. And whenever Hellspur Posse Boss enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 red mercenary creature tokens with tap that creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, activated as sorcery. So I like that it's got a nice enter the battlefield ability, and it gives your outlaws all haste so they can attack immediately. And we do have a good bit of cards already in Standard that meet those requirements. So if we do indeed end up with a Outlaws deck, then I think this is a card that fits into that, because you're going to get in essence 3 bodies on the field when this happens, and 2 of the 3 are going to be able to go ahead and attack on that turn. So I think that if we get that outlaw deck, this is a card that it's going to want, because giving everything haste will be a really nice ability for it. Next, we have Stingerback Terror for 2 and 2 red mana. You get a Scorpion Dragon with flying and trample. That's a 7/7. Now, the downside is Stingerback Terror gets -1/-1 for each card in your hand, and you can plot it for 3 mana. This is an interesting card to me because a lot of times your red decks, by turn 4 or turn 5, they're running out of cards. So you're likely to end up with a 7/7 when you cast this. And then if you have a way to give it haste, you're in a great position because at that point, it's going to be a 7/7 that's going to be trampling through, hopefully doing the last bit of damage to win a game. So I like the card, but it's probably no more than a 1 or 2 of in a deck, and neither of these cards actually fit well into the current mono red strategies that are out there, because basically those are all built around haste creatures. Next, we've got Gared, Mirror of the Wilds, for a red, a green, and a white mana. You can legendary creature that's a human shaman with haste and is a 3/3. And non-token creatures you control have tap, create a token that's a copy of target token you control that entered the battlefield this turn. So if there's a token deck out there, I guess, then this would be a good kind of lordy kind of card for it, because you could, in essence, start doubling up your tokens, or maybe even doing it more than that. If you've got other non-token creatures that you can simply tap, there are probably 1 or 2 mana creatures, and then you're creating a big team of creatures in play that will hopefully help you win that particular game. I think this does go well with cards like War Leader's Call, where when you have a creature enter the battlefield, it does 1 damage to your opponent. Well, if you have the ability by playing a 1-drop and a 2-drop, and then this on turn 3, you attack with it, okay, you do some damage, but then on turn 4, you start casting spells that are going to create tokens, and you start tapping your creatures to double down on those tokens. And then if you've got something like War Leader's Call in play, that could do a lot of indirect damage to your opponent and potentially just win the game right there. Next, we've got Pillage the Bog for a green and a black mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to look at the top X cards of your library, where X is twice the number of lands you control. Put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and you can plot it for 3. So at a minimum with this card, you're going to be able to look at 4 cards and choose 1 of them. So I think right there, that's a decent ability in Golgari colors. But the big thing is, when you play this in the mid to late game and you've got 6 or 7 lands in play, basically you're going down 14 cards to get whatever you want. So this is going to see play in any kind of Golgari style deck, because for the most part, you're going to be able to dig and get whatever it is that you need, hopefully to win a game. Next, we've got Assimilation Aegis for 1, a white and a blue mana. You get an artifact that's an equipment, and when Assimilation of Aegis enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature until Assimilation Aegis leaves the battlefield. And whenever Assimilation Aegis becomes attached to a creature, for as long as Assimilation Aegis remains attached to it, that creature becomes a copy of a creature card exiled with Assimilation Aegis. So you can, in essence, if you play this, you get their best creature and you exile it, you attach this to one of your creatures, and now it becomes a copy of their best creature. So I think, in my mind, this is going to be a card that certainly our Azorius control style decks are going to want to consider, because A, it takes your opponent's best creature off the field, and then if you have any kind of token or creature that you can immediately attach it to, then you're going to become a copy of whatever their best card is, and probably be able to attack in immediately with that. So I think this has some very, very practical application in Standard, and I think we're going to see quite a bit of it. Next, we've got Slick Sequence. For 1 blue and 1 red mana, you get an instant, and Slick Sequence deals 2 damage to any target. And if you cast another spell this turn, you get to draw a card. So this is a card you're playing in a sequence, where you're playing a 1-drop spell, whether it's a Consider or Play with Fire or a Shock or something like that. You play that immediately, and then you follow it up with this, and not only are you going to deal with 2 damage, but then you get the benefit of drawing that card. So this is probably going to go into an Is It Spellslinger deck if it sees Standard play. Next, we've got Canyon Crab for 1 and a blue mana. You get a crab that's a 0/5, and you can pay 1 and a blue, and Canyon Crab gets +2/-2 until end of turn. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, draw a card, and then discard a card. So this goes along with a couple things. Typically our Azorius control decks, they're not casting many spells on their own turn. So you cast this on your, say second turn, and it sits there on the board, and then you don't cast spells for several turns on your turn. You're playing on your opponent's turn. And that's going to allow you to rummage through your deck to get the things that you need against your opponent. So I think this has definite standard playability because of that rummaging ability that's just naturally attached to it. Next, we have Forsaken Miner for a black mana, and you get a Skeleton Rogue. That's a 2/2. And Forsaken Miner can't block. And whenever you commit a crime, you may pay a black mana, and if you do, return Forsaken Miner from your graveyard to the battlefield. 1 mana, 2/2s, they're nice cards to have, and it doesn't even come into play tap. I mean, you can't block with it, but if you have a way to give it some haste, then it's going to be able to attack immediately. So I like this card as a very low-end card. Certainly in any limited style deck I'd be playing, I'd be looking at this as a good option. But that ability to bring it back from the graveyard constantly anytime you commit a crime, that's going to be a nice ability, because you're going to, in any black deck, be playing cards like Go for the Throat, Play with Fire, and any number of other removal spells. So you're going to be able to get this back from the graveyard on a continuous basis because of those spells you're going to cast. Next, we've got Raven of Fell Omens. For 1 and a black mana, you get a bird. That's a 1/2 with flying. And whenever you commit a crime, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is a card, it's a common, but I really like this card because what it's doing is anytime you're playing just general spells, you're going to gain a life, your opponent loses a life, and that drain is a really nice ability. And a lot of times in our black decks, we're playing a lot of instants and sorceries and other spells, and as a result of that, we're going to be able to trigger this ability multiple times over the course of a game. And again, based on where we are in standard, every little incremental advantage you can get, you need to be able to win games of Magic, and I think this is a card that's going to give you that incremental help. Next, we've got Shoot the Sheriff. For a black mana and 1, you get an instant, destroy target non-outlaw creature. Okay, so generally speaking, probably in limited, not a very good card, but one that you'll probably have in your deck anyways. But it definitely has some standard application if you're playing against a deck that doesn't have assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks in it. So I see this as a sideboard card that, hey, if you've got it, you can get in there and kill something for just 2 mana. Next, we've got Brimstone Roundup. For 1 and a red mana, you get an enchantment, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate it only as a sorcery, and you can plot it for 3. This is another one of those cards that it's an interesting card because we're seeing, again, more of these cards that, hey, every time you cast your second spell, you get an advantage. So Brimstone Roundup is just another one in that line of things. We'll have to see if there's a deck that maybe can take advantage of that play a second card that we see across a number of different cards from the last year to 2 years of Magic. Next, we've got Hellspur Brute. For 4 and a red mana, you get a Minotaur Mercenary. That's a 5/4, and it has affinity for Outlaws. So this is a card that was meant to be in an Outlaws deck. So if we have an Outlaws deck, this is an automatic easy 4 of include, because anytime you play one of those spells, put it on the field, now you're going to reduce the cost. And we've had a number of cards over the last year that have a similar kind of ability, and they see play. So this is one that definitely will, and the fact that it has trample makes it even better. Next, we've got Magebane Lizard. For 1 and a red mana, you get a lizard, and whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Magebane Lizard deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-creature spells that they've cast this turn. So we keep getting these red cards that have hate against certain types of decks. And this is another good one. So first of all, it's not going to be main deckable because there's just going to be too much variability in it. But this is a great sideboard card if you're playing against a Spellslinger type deck, if you're playing against a control deck or a mid-range deck that does have a lot of things that they're going to be trying to do to get to the cards that they want. This is a great card because you're going to be pinging it over and over and over again as they try to play cards to get to where they need to. And that little bit of damage goes a long way in winning games of Magic. Next, we have Reckless Lackey. For a red mana, you get a Goblin Pirate with First Strike and Haste. That's a 1/2. All right, another good common from the set. This is going to see play. First Strike and Haste are really nice abilities, and I can see this actually going right into the current mono red deck because it has First Strike. And it also gets that haste ability. So because of that, it's a really nice card to have in that deck. And the fact that it's not a 1/1 helps as well. So it's not going to die to some of those, hey, deal 1 damage to everything spells that are out there. And because of that, First Strike ability, I really like this. So I think mono red players are going to figure out a way to use this in standard. Next, we've got Take for a Ride. For 2 and a red mana, you get a sorcery, and Take for a Ride has flash as long as you've committed a crime this turn, targeting opponents. Anything they control and or cards in their graveyard, of course, is a crime. And then you get to gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. So this is a card, I think, we've seen cards like this throughout Magic's history where red gets to steal your creature for a turn and then they're forced to give it back because they take it on their turn, they attack with it, and they give it back. Well, this is an opportunity to take it on your opponent's turn if you played another spell that's targeted your opponent or anything they control or their graveyard. And the result of that is now you can take their best creature and have it block for you, and that is a very, very powerful ability. That can change the state of a game because you might be able to kill their creature when it blocks and maybe kill another creature that it ends up blocking. So I really like this card in standard. It's certainly a sideboard consideration in red decks. Next, we've got Beast Bond Outcaster. For 2 and a green mana, you get a human druid. That's a 3/3. And whenever Beast Bond Outcaster enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. And you can plot it for 2. So you can play this for its plot cost on turn 2. And then on turn 3, you bring it into play. So you protected it for a turn. And then you pay one of the many 3-cost 4/4s or greater that we see in standard right now. So this is a great draw spell in my mind for any deck that's got a really good number of 4/4s or better in terms of the power and toughness of things in standard. And again, we're continuing to see some cards in green that are more helpful. There's some triggering things, and they're certainly large creatures, but we haven't really found a great place for green so far in standard. But hopefully with these cards, we get a little bit closer to having green be a more relevant color in standard. And I think this is a card that can help do that because that card draw ability is a nice one. Next, we've got Intrepid Stable Master. For 1 and a green mana, you get a Human Scout with Reach, and you can tap it to add a green mana, or you can tap to add 2 mana of any one color and spend this mana only to cast mounts or vehicle spells. So I like this card. The fact that it has Reach is really nice, and it's a 2/2 body, so that means it's going to stop your Phoenix Chicks and stuff like that. So also, the ability to provide that additional mana I really like because it's not going to be as fragile as some of the current mana dorks that we have that are 1/1, so they die to almost anything. And this, I think, will allow us to ramp out stuff faster in green and still be a good body in the end that can protect itself a little bit. All right. And our last card of the day is Patient Naturalist. For 2 and a green mana, you get a Human Scout. That's a 2/3. And whenever a patient naturalist enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. Put a land card from among the mill cards into your hand. If you can't, create a treasure token. So very nice ability. It goes probably right now into the Nissa deck that we have seen out there, that self-milling, and then when you do that, you actually get that treasure token, or you can get a land if you mill a land. So I like that for this card, and I think it's a card that potentially that deck might want as another thing to help it push its game plan in that particular build. All right, those are our cards from today for day 3 of Outlaws at Thunder Junction. Thanks for staying to the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe, and you can watch our videos from day 1 and 2 of Outlaws of Thunder Junction spoiler here by clicking on the video on the screen. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.